Paul's comments about walking in the Spirit are not contrary to obedience to the law. He is not proposing that Christians should live in a way that violates the law. Again, Paul is not opposed to the law or to obedience to the law. What he is opposed to is the legalistic way in which the law was being misused. The genuine obedience that God desires never can be achieved by outward compulsion, but only by an inward motivation produced by the Spirit. Is there any conflict in the legitimate walking in the Spirit and obeying God's true, genuine laws? Is there any conflict there? No. None. There's no conflict there. It's always harmony. But can law-keeping sometimes be an obstacle to walking in the Spirit?
Absolutely.
How? How can that happen? What type? There's a hand, someone who's answer that question? So what type of law and law-keeping is opposed to the Spirit? This is from the same book, Christ Object Lessons, page 97. It says, the man who attempts to keep the commandments of God from a sense of obligation merely, because he is required to do so, will never enter into the joy of obedience. He does not obey. When the requirements of God are accounted a burden because they cut across human inclinations, we may know that the life is not a Christian life. True obedience is the outworking of a principle within. It springs from the love of righteousness, the love of the law of God. The essence of all righteousness is loyalty to our Redeemer. Thus, this will lead us to do right because it is right, and right doing is pleasing to God. Amen. So, do you hear in this little paragraph two types of laws being contrasted here? What is the natural result in your heart when you're required by an external authority to obey a law under threat of punishment that you have not agreed is the right law? You just know they have power, and if you don't, you'll get punished, but you don't really think it's reasonable. What happens in your heart?
Rebellion.
Okay? You may go along to avoid the punishment, but is there any joy? Is there any peace in your obedience?
You may do the speed limit.
Exactly.
What happens though in your heart when you obey, not only because you understand and agree that it makes sense, but it's actually the way you prefer to do it in the first place, and that's what you'd like to do even if there wasn't a law? Then what happens in your heart? See, genuine law-keeping isn't about an argument over the accuracy of one's definition of the commandments. Oh, let's argue. Should we have images of Christ in our churches, or thou shalt not make any graven images, so we shouldn't have images in our churches? Let's argue over that. That's the commandment. Thou shalt make any graven images. And that's a big debate in some Christian circles. There are many others. I won't go into all the others, but you know them that we back and forth. But assuming that whatever law one is attempting to keep is in fact the correct way of understanding it, what happens in the heart if you keep it, but do so under the imposed law model? If I don't keep it, God will put a demerit in my record book in heaven, and if I don't get that legally accounted for, he'll be required by justice to punish me at some time in the eternal judgment future. And that's why I keep it, so he won't punish me. What happens in my heart if that's my motive, that's my understanding? Even if it's the right one.
Fear.
Rebellion. There's no peace, there's no joy, there's no real obedience. You're not obeying. This is how Satan has infected Christianity, by getting Christians to believe that God's law functions like the laws we make. And millions have grown up with increasingly fearful of God and trying to keep his law, trying to stay out of legal trouble with God, or legal loophole law keeping. I know I can't stay out of trouble, so I'll claim the legal perfection of Christ to my account. But if I don't claim that, then God will still have to kill me. This has resulted in their characters being hardened, leading to fractures in the church. And there's 34,000 different Christian groups all broken up because they all have their different interpretations of what the law means, and we're going to do it the right way. And you're not doing it the right way, and so we're going to have to look down on you. And so even within the Adventist church, we all know that a county without an Adventist church in this world is called a dark county. I mean, the only light comes from the Adventist church. I mean, come on.
That's true.
Nobody else has the right definitions. And that leads to using of methods of force and coercion. So we're going to want to get a hold of government. And we're going to pass laws to make sure that people morally live the way we know God has prescribed that we must live. And we'll punish people who don't. And this is going on right now. Why do you think we wanted a certain election? So we could put certain justices on the Supreme Court, so we can get certain laws passed so that people in this country will finally start living the Christian way.
Or else.
Or else. And it's throughout the history, Catholics have burned Protestants at the stake, and Protestants have burned Catholics at the stake. The Irish, the Protestant Catholic wars, why are they warring against each other? We have different sets of definitions, and we know that when you break rules, we must punish. We have to punish these rule breakers. We need to come back to realize that we all actually are just suffering from the same sickness of heart, the same infection of fear and self-centeredness, and we need the same remedy provided by Jesus Christ. And true law-keeping stems from a principle put in the heart of love for God, love your Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. All law hangs on these principles. And if you don't have that heart change, it doesn't really matter what rules you keep. It doesn't. Anybody want to argue that point? If your heart has not been changed, it doesn't matter what rules you keep. Yes?
At what point will God turn us over or turn people over to a reprobate mind?